And today with us we have Mr. Frank Ledwidge, Senior Lecturer at the Royal Air Force College and a former military intelligence officer. Mr. Ledwidge, I welcome you. And my first question, Ukrainian pilots are successfully training on F-16 and Mirage planes. What is the role of these aircraft on the real battlefield situation on the front line?
Well, I've always been quite negative about this compared with other commentators. I don't see either airframe or airplane, as a game changer. They are, both of them, the Mirage 2000 and the variants of F-16 that Ukraine will be getting, late 1980s, perhaps 1990s technology. The Mirage 2000 is no longer made. The F-16 variant is coming from Belgium, Netherlands, Norway, and Denmark. Also, I think Greece will be giving some variants in due course. The important thing is what avionics are in it. And I would doubt that the avionics, which is the electronics within an aircraft, is the latest models, for the simple reason that the United States, which licenses this equipment, would not wish an aircraft to be shot down with this electronics over Russia, or indeed over southern Ukraine, where Russian forces occupy. I've always had my doubts about particularly the F-16 because it's designed for high-level operations. It was designed during the early 70s when it was really innovatory. The F-16 is probably the most successful, maybe the F-15 fighter plane ever made in terms of its combat record. But it was designed in the early 70s to provide high-level defense against Soviet bombers in North America, and of course for any other reason. It's been a very successful strike aircraft as well. But the aircraft I think will be much more useful for Ukraine is the Gripen, which I think Ukraine will get in due course when Sweden transitions to its new model. But nonetheless, these aircraft are probably in the form that Ukraine is receiving them, and clearly there are secret elements to this, probably at least equal to the latest Su-34s, which are still being made, of course, and conceivably, depending on how they're flown, even more advanced aircraft, such as the Su-35. But they are not a game changer. They are fairly old technology. And of course, by the way, the important thing isn't the airframe, as I indicated to you, so the electronics I've said, but also the weapon system that's attached to it. And once again, the missile systems, which are the anti-aircraft missile systems that Ukraine are getting, are quite good. They're AIM-9 late models, but they're not the very latest missiles that, say, the Royal Air Force has or the French Air Force have, for the very good reason that if some of these missiles misfire and they will land intact, just as missiles have landed on Ukraine, and that gives a big gift to enemy intelligence.
The DPRK participation in hostilities and missile terror from Russia, is there anything to suggest that this tactic and strategy will change over time when Russia will be about to join some possible negotiations?
Yes, I think there is, but they're doing it in a way you would expect from Russia, which is to set out conditions that are untenable and unacceptable for Ukraine or anyone else. And the messaging, you'll notice the messaging that the Russian state is putting out is very strong. They're not willing to start negotiations on anything that the West, Trump or Ukraine may offer. So, for example, as you know, they're refusing outright any suggestion of a ceasefire on the zero line as it stands. No, they say we must have our 4 oblasts, and that's that. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know, but it's a very strong negotiating position, and it's messaged very consistently over a period of months. This is a problem for the West because, of course, Western negotiating positions are disorganized and inconsistent. The Russian negotiating starting position is highly, doesn't vary. And you notice it was originally set out in June, I think June the 14th or 15th by Putin himself, and echoed again by Lavrov and others since. So there's this consistent messaging, it's very strong strategic communication, backing up their negotiating stance. And the negotiating position of the West in Ukraine is not consistent or solid in the same way. There will come a time, I think, when Trump comes into power and that changes. But until now, we see no sign of Russia agreeing to the start of negotiations, which, of course, as I indicate, does not in any way mean they will not do so. That's their formal position. And just one other thing, by the way, Pavlo, I'm very familiar with one of your leading experts on negotiation with the Russians, a Ukrainian diplomat, very senior diplomat, who had a long conversations with her about Russian negotiation techniques. And that tells me two things. First of all, you have experts who know all this in your diplomatic and military establishment, particularly diplomatic establishment. And, of course, that Russian techniques are very familiar to them.
We understand how Russia uses the DPRK resources in Ukraine, but how can Russia strengthen North Korea's military industry, and how does it threaten global security?
Yes, I think that's absolutely correct. And you hit on the key point here that whilst cash is very important for a very poor and primitive monarchy that is absolute monarchy that is North Korea, far more dangerous globally is ballistic missile technology that Russia may be offering. And I have two particular examples in mind. The first is construction of the missiles themselves. And I have some familiarity with this, so I worked on this in Iraq and Iraqi ballistic missile technology. And the shells of missiles are very difficult to build, even if you have space experience. So that's the first thing, but much more dangerous than that, because I think North Korea has proved themselves fairly capable in the building of ballistic missiles, but they can be improved, or even space launch vehicles, which are very much similar technology. Clearly, Russia has decades of expertise in that. That's one thing. But the second, and I think even more important aspect, which I feel is very dangerous, and the United States should have very close regard to this, particularly them and Japan, is aeroshell technology. So the aeroshell, when you have a nuclear warhead or any kind of warhead that goes into the atmosphere and comes down again on a ballistic missile, as you know, the ballistics of this are that the missile fires and then the warhead takes its own predictable route, sometimes with some precision. One thing that North Koreans have found difficult is producing warheads that actually arrive at their target. And the United States, until quite recently, assumed that many of their warheads would not arrive on target because the aeroshells are poorly built, or the technology or materials are not available to them. I suspect, I would expect, that one thing the North Koreans would be asking for, and probably getting, because they are providing a great deal in terms of munitions and men, as you said, is this aeroshell technology, which will allow nuclear warheads from North Korean missiles to arrive at their targets with some accuracy. And that's very dangerous, not for the stability of particularly the Western Pacific, but of course the world more globally. If Kim Jong-un believes, for example, that he now is in possession of a nuclear arsenal that will work for sure, as the Russian one probably would, certainly would, that changes some calculations and creates dangers that we can't think of. So I suspect it's ballistic missile technology that's the really dangerous aspect. And of course, Russia has that and expertise.
Is the new Oreshnik threat a real one, or just another one of Putin's bluffs about red lines and everything else?
Yeah, I think it's a real danger for Ukraine. This is it's not a Soviet missile, I think, but it's not new either. It's a Russian Federation. I think it's originated. I think it's RS-26, which was supposedly discontinued in 2012, but I think it's relatively new relative to some of the older intermediate range missiles. But nonetheless, you're right, it's an old design. Intelligence suggests, or information suggests, that the RS-26 development was restarted in about 2018, which would indicate there's probably not that many in the arsenal. But you saw on the strike on Dnipro some weeks ago, the way they were deploying that and the effect that it would have. You can't shoot them down. Ukraine has no technology to shoot them down. So the very threat of the use of, even in a conventional context, of such a missile is surely very disturbing to the Ukrainian government. So just to put it into context, none of those warheads which arrived in Dnipro, as far as I know, had any warhead of any kind in them, or any explosive materials. They didn't explode. But what it demonstrated was that one missile can deliver 36 projectiles, and even the kinetic effect of those is very great, probably equivalent to a small explosive device. But if you start filling them with conventional explosive warheads, then it becomes a real danger. One missile with 36 separate vehicles, as it were, is a very dangerous. It can't be shot down. Is very disturbing and rather frightening, I think. To use it in that way, say in Kiev, would be a major, would be a really big thing. And I think in those circumstances, the United States would step in, and you might consider, I think the Americans would consider, especially under Trump, the deployment of the kind of missiles that can shoot these down. That would also be an escalation, but I can't see Trump accepting that kind of behaviour from Putin, the kind of behaviour that will deliver an intermediate range ballistic missiles with considerable effect. I think that would elicit a response from the US, as it did in Israel, of course, when there was nothing like the Oreshnik there, but the United States deployed one of their batteries, and they've only got 7 batteries of terminal high altitude air defence missiles, the THAAD system, which is effective, the most effective against those ballistic missiles. Patriot doesn't do it. So yes, it's very dangerous, I think. I doubt we'll see that in the near future unless there's some considerable escalation, which we can't at the moment predict, which of course can happen any time. So the answer to your question is yes, I think the Oreshnik does represent a threat. Is it a step change? No, it simply represents a more effective conventional ballistic missile with multiple entry warheads. That we've seen it deployed. It was an escalation. But I think if it were used against Kiev, it would elicit a response from the US, which would be dangerous, I think, for European security overall. So I don't see Russia using it again on a target like that, like Kiev, but we could see it elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ledwidge, for answering our questions today in the studio, and have a nice evening.